You've become too expensive for what you actually do. That was the first sentence Mark Reynolds said to me that morning. No greeting, no preamble, just a verdict, delivered like a cost report. I was still standing in the doorway of the conference room, my badge dangling uselessly from my hand. The access light outside had already turned red. Someone had planned ahead. This will only take 10 minutes, Mark added, glancing at his watch as if I were the one wasting his time. I stepped inside and immediately understood why the room felt wrong. Tyler Brooks was already there. Early 20s, new graduate, cheap suit, cheaper confidence. He sat in my chair with his laptop open, logged into systems I had built, monitored, and signed off on for over a decade. My dashboards, my alerts, my responsibility now displayed under his name. Mark leaned against the table, perfectly relaxed, CEO posture, hands clean. We're restructuring for efficiency, he said. The way executives do when they want a sentence to sound strategic instead of personal. Tyler will be taking over your operational access. One quick note before we go on. This story includes fictionalized elements and AI-assisted storytelling, designed to educate, reflect real corporate behavior, and deepen emotional impact. If this kind of content feels heavy for you right now, it's okay to pause, take a breath, and come back another time. Your well-being matters more than any story. If you're still here, let's continue. I was the Senior Risk and Systems Director. 15 years. Every audit, every insurance review, every time something went wrong and someone needed a name on the line, it was mine. I didn't just manage systems, I signed for them. I absorbed the risk so leadership didn't have to. Mark never did. He smiled, almost amused by his own simplicity. Passwords are all we need now. That was the moment the insult fully landed. To him. My role was a collection of logins. To me. It had always been accountability legal, financial, personal. Mark made decisions. I carried consequences. Tyler shifted in his seat, unsure whether to look confident or invisible. Mark slid a checklist across the table. 30 minutes to hand over credentials. HR will handle the rest. I looked around. No legal counsel, no compliance officer, no mention of insurance, audits, or responsibility transfer, just a cheaper replacement and a CEO who thought authority lived in a password. Shock tightened my chest. Humiliation burned hot, then cooled into something sharper. Quiet rage doesn't shout. It remembers. And in that room, no one realized what they had just failed to replace. I don't know how your day has been, but I'm glad you're here. If you can, take a moment to dim the lights in the room or turn on a warm lamp, just to make the space feel calmer while you listen. Where are you listening from right now? If stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing. There's more ahead. By the time I returned to my desk, the office already felt smaller. Karen Whitman didn't call me into a room. She didn't explain. 5 minutes before the workday officially ended, my email simply stopped refreshing. No error message, no warning, just silence. I tried sending myself a test note from my phone. It bounced back. HR efficiency, executed cleanly, across the floor. Tyler Brooks rolled his chair toward me with an apologetic half-smile. Quick question, he said. If a system flags something overnight, do we ignore it or escalate it? Innocent words. Dangerous question. I asked who would be signing the escalation. He blinked, confused. Then asked another one. And insurance prefers speed, right? I watched him take notes he didn't yet understand. I remembered the nights I stayed late so Mark Reynolds wouldn't have to. I remembered signing emergency approvals while he was traveling. Unreachable. Confident someone else would carry the weight. I remembered audits that nearly shut us down, saved only because I knew which line to explain, which risk to own, which signature to place. No applause, just responsibility. Mark appeared beside my desk, like this was all casual. You're great. Maris, he said lightly. Just not cost-effective anymore. He gestured toward Tyler's screen. Look how fast he works. Fast wasn't the same as accountable. Cheap wasn't the same as safe. But none of that fit neatly on a spreadsheet. I packed my bag slowly, feeling the injustice rise with every quiet minute. They had stripped access, status, and voice, but they hadn't touched the structure beneath it all. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed. An automated notification from our insurance portal. Primary Responsible Officer, Maris Dean. Active. It wasn't triumph. It was pressure, quiet and heavy. The kind you feel when a system waits for a signature that never comes. Somewhere above me, executives were still congratulating themselves. On paper. The numbers looked perfect. In reality, nothing was signed. Yet the silence kept growing, and no one noticed the risk accumulating. I didn't smile. I just understood exactly what they had forgotten. I handed over the passwords the way I'd always done my work: clean, documented, complete. Every credential was listed, labeled, verified, server access, backup keys, emergency overrides, nothing missing, nothing delayed. Tyler Brooks sat across from me, typing quickly, nodding as if speed alone proved competence. Mark Reynolds watched from the doorway, satisfied, already mentally done with me. Just to confirm, Tyler said, eyes on the screen. I've got full access now. Yes, I answered calmly. Operational access. He smiled. Relieved? Good. That's what we needed. That sentence landed exactly where it belonged. I walked him through the checklist, step by step, without commentary. I didn't warn him. I didn't lecture. I didn't correct the assumptions everyone else was making for him. Cold clarity has a way of removing unnecessary impulses. When you understand the system completely, you stop trying to save people from their own shortcuts. Mark clapped his hands once. Efficient. See, this wasn't complicated. I almost laughed, but didn't. Complicated had never been the problem. Responsibility was, for 15 years. My job had never been about access. It was about standing between the company and the moment things went wrong. I signed the approvals no one wanted to touch. I absorbed the risk so executives could make bold decisions without consequence. When regulators called, they asked for my name. When insurers demanded accountability, it was already on file. Passwords were tools. Accountability was a weight. When the checklist was done, I closed my laptop and stood. No dramatic pause. No final argument. There was nothing left to negotiate. I'll escort you out, Karen from HR said, suddenly attentive again. That won't be necessary, I replied. Tyler didn't look up as I passed him. He was busy exploring menus he thought represented control. In the elevator, the quiet felt deliberate, the kind of silence that follows a decision everyone believes is final. Halfway down, my phone vibrated. An automated email, no subject line, just a system notification from the insurer we'd worked with for years. Primary Responsible Officer Maris Dean. Status active. I stared at the screen. Not surprised. No one had updated the records. No one had transferred the liability. They'd replaced access and called it leadership. The clarity was almost comforting, not emotional, not vindictive, just precise. Systems don't care about confidence or titles. They respond to names, signatures, and responsibility. And at that moment, everything was still pointing to me, quietly, patiently, waiting for the first real test that no spreadsheet could predict or fully explain itself. The doors opened. I stepped out into the lobby, lighter than I expected. I hadn't taken anything with me, but something important hadn't been taken from me either. It started with something so small that no one thought to slow down. An email from a long-term partner arrived just after noon. A routine data discrepancy, the kind of issue we'd resolved 100 times before. Tyler Brooks jumped on it immediately, fingers flying, voice confident on the conference call. He promised a fix within the hour. Spoke quickly, eager to prove speed could replace experience. From what I heard later, he did exactly what he was trained to do. He rerouted the process, cleared the error flag, and pushed the update live. Clean, fast, impressive on the surface. The partner thanked him. Mark Reynolds congratulated him in the group chat. Efficiency, apparently, had arrived. Then the follow-up came. The partner's compliance team asked for confirmation of liability coverage before proceeding. Standard procedure. one digital form, one required signature. Tyler forwarded the request to Mark. Mark forwarded it to Karen. Karen forwarded it back to Tyler with a note, "Who's authorized to sign this now?" The room went quiet. Tyler searched the system. He had access to everything: dashboards, controls, override tools, but the sign-off field was locked. He tried again. Same result. The system wasn't broken. It was waiting. Mark called an emergency huddle. Voices overlapped. Someone suggested delaying the partner. Someone else suggested temporary approval. But insurance doesn't accept temporary confidence. It accepts names. They pulled the records. That's when they saw it. Every policy, every audit trail, every responsibility document still listed one person. Me. The incident hadn't escalated yet, but it was leaning in that direction. Without a valid sign-off, the insurer wouldn't confirm coverage. Without coverage, the partner wouldn't proceed. And without proceeding, the small issue stopped being small. I wasn't in the room, but I could picture it perfectly. The silence, the glances, the realization that access and authority were not the same thing. My phone buzzed while I was at home, folding laundry, trying not to think about work. A private message from Karen Whitman appeared on my screen. "Can we just clarify something?" Legally, I stared at the words, feeling the suspense settle in. The system hadn't failed. It had simply asked the question no one else wanted to answer. What none of them could change was timing. The insurer needed confirmation before end of day. The partner needed assurance before close of business. Tyler could work faster. Mark could talk louder. Karen could forward more emails. But none of that created authority. The clock kept moving, indifferent to confidence or panic. Somewhere, a spreadsheet still showed savings. Underneath it, a mechanism waited for a name that hadn't been replaced. And for the first time, the cost of that oversight was about to become impossible for anyone to ignore by morning at least. It would have been easy to respond right away. Karen's message sat on my phone, polite but uneasy, asking for clarification that wasn't really a question. I chose not to answer. Silence, when used deliberately, isn't avoidance, it's structure. I knew what was happening inside that building without being there. Mark Reynolds hates uncertainty. He thrives on motion, decisions, noise, according to someone who still texted me quietly. He called an internal meeting within minutes. Voices rose, fingers pointed. He demanded answers that didn't exist yet. I didn't enjoy it. That's important to say. This wasn't revenge. It was observation. For years, I'd been the buffer between Mark's confidence and the systems that required discipline. I'd absorbed tension so he could appear decisive. Now that buffer was gone, and pressure moved where it always does, upward. Hours passed. I made dinner. I folded laundry. I let the moment breathe. When you rush to fix a problem, you often rob it of the chance to reveal its true shape. Leadership failures, I've learned, only become visible when no one rushes to cover them. Another message came through, this time sharper, then a missed call. I waited until the day's end approached, until urgency had replaced irritation. Then I sent one email, no emotion, no explanation, just a single sentence, written the way insurers prefer. "Please review responsibility records." That was it. The effect was immediate, though not visible to me at first. Inside the company, conversations stopped looping and started narrowing. They reviewed the documents they'd ignored. They followed the trail I'd maintained for years. They discovered, slowly and uncomfortably, that responsibility isn't transferred by confidence or convenience. Late that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Karen or Mark. It was an automated notification from the insurance portal. Status update. Policy under review. I stared at the screen longer than I expected. Not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed something I'd always known. Systems don't respond to emotion. They respond to records. And when those records are incomplete, everything pauses. In that pause, I felt something unexpected: calm, not relief, not triumph, just alignment, for once. The pressure wasn't sitting on my chest. It was distributed exactly where it belonged. I thought about how often experience is dismissed because it's invisible, how systems are praised until they enforce discipline. This wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. That distinction mattered. Procedures don't bend for charisma. They don't respond to anger. They wait, patiently, for compliance. And waiting, I realized, was no longer my problem to solve. That realization settled quietly, steady and undeniable, like gravity finally noticed, without noise, negotiation, or anyone asking permission again. Silence had done its work, not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to let the truth surface on its own. And once that happens, no meeting can put it back where it was. It arrived just after 8 the next morning, stamped with language no executive ever wants to see. Policy suspended due to unauthorized responsibility transfer. The email didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It simply stated a fact. And facts like that move faster than panic ever could. Within minutes, my phone began vibrating across the kitchen counter. But none of the calls were from Mark Reynolds. Pride delays contact longer than strategy. Inside the building, panic didn't explode. It leaked. Mark tried to take control the only way he knew how: volume. He called an emergency meeting, demanded explanations, accused Karen of missing a step, and Tyler of misunderstanding instructions, according to a message I received later. His voice echoed through the glass walls, sharp and restless. He kept repeating the same sentence. This can't be right. But insurance language doesn't negotiate. It waits. By mid-morning, James Holloway stepped in. The board chairman rarely involved himself in daily operations, which is precisely why everyone listened when his assistant announced a mandatory session. No agenda, no delay. And one unusual instruction: Mark would not be chairing. That detail traveled faster than the suspension notice. Authority shifts are always quiet at first. Chairs change, seats move. People stop making eye contact with the person who used to lead the room. Mark still arrived confident, still carried himself like a CEO. But confidence has a short shelf life when documents start circulating. I wasn't in the room, but I knew the order of events. James asked for clarity. Legal asked for records. Insurance was patched in. Every question ended the same way, circling back to responsibility, not access. Mark interrupted. He defended the restructuring. He argued efficiency. He talked numbers. Then James raised a hand. According to Karen, the room went silent. "Mark," James said, calm and unmistakable, "we need you to step out for a moment." That was the moment panic became visible. Mark laughed at first, a short, disbelieving sound, then stopped when no one joined him. He looked around, searching for agreement, but found only lowered eyes and open folders. He stood slowly, anger tightening his jaw, and walked out without another word. The meeting continued without him. When I learned what happened, I felt no satisfaction, just confirmation. Systems don't punish arrogance. They simply refuse to protect it. Leadership isn't proven when things go right. It's exposed the instant protection disappears. And that morning, a letter had done what no argument ever could. The board stayed inside for hours, phones muted, voices low, outside. Managers whispered, timelines froze, and partners waited. Panic doesn't always scream. Sometimes it calculates. By the time Mark realized silence had replaced authority, the company was already learning how expensive efficiency could become. That lesson arrived faster than any apology he might later try to offer. It would not wait for permission or forgiveness from anyone. I heard about the collapse in fragments, pieced together from messages that grew shorter and more frantic as the day went on. By the time the board reconvened, Mark Reynolds was no longer angry. He was defensive, which is what comes just before fear. Inside the room, Mark did what executives always do when authority slips. He blamed process. He blamed HR. Karen Whitman became his shield, according to her later. He kept repeating that she had approved everything, that procedures had been followed, that responsibility transfer was in progress. None of that mattered to the documents spread across the table. Tyler Brooks broke first. When legal asked who had instructed him to bypass the sign-off requirement, his voice cracked. "I just followed instructions." He said, "It wasn't defiance. It was panic. The kind that comes when confidence meets consequence for the first time." What followed wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. The board requested records, not access logs, not emails, signatures, years of them, risk acknowledgments, insurance confirmations, audit approvals. Page after page appeared on the screen, each one quieter than the last. My name filled the margins. Mark's did not. The realization didn't land all at once. It unfolded slowly, cruelly, as patterns tend to do. Mark had authorized strategy, budgets, restructuring plans, but when it came to absorbing risk, to putting a name where liability lived, he had always deferred. He had relied on me, entirely. No one accused him outright. They didn't need to. Silence did the work. James Holloway asked a single question that ended the discussion. "When was the last time you personally signed a risk document?" Mark, there was no answer. I imagined the room then, the way collapse feels when it isn't loud. Shoulders tightening, chairs shifting, eyes lowering. This wasn't about blame anymore. It was about survival. The board moved quickly after that. Not emotionally, strategically. Insurance couldn't lapse. Coverage had to be restored, whatever it cost, whoever it required. Options were discussed. Consultants, interim authority, external oversight. My name came up without ceremony. By the time I heard the final detail, the decision had already taken shape. The board wasn't asking who was at fault. They were asking how to keep the company insured. Collapse doesn't announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it arrives as a spreadsheet, a signature line left blank for years, suddenly impossible to ignore. I understood then that accountability doesn't vanish when people leave. It waits. It accumulates. It remembers. Leadership failure rarely looks dramatic at first. It looks administrative, and once exposed, it forces choices no one prepared for. Because insurance, regulators, and boards care less about intent than they do about names, dates, and signatures placed or avoided. Over time, those details decide survival long after confidence fades and authority collapses completely without warning ever. The call came late in the afternoon. When the day had already decided how it would end, I recognized Mark Reynolds' number immediately. I didn't answer on the first ring, not to punish him, but to confirm something for myself. The urgency on the second ring told me everything I needed to know. When I answered, his voice was different, lower, slower. The sharp confidence was gone, replaced by something careful. "Maris," he said, as if we were old colleagues again. "We need to talk." I let the silence stretch, just long enough to remind him that timing matters. "I'm listening," I said. He spoke about misunderstandings, about pressure from the board, about how fast everything had escalated. He avoided words like mistake and responsibility, circling them instead. I noticed that habit years ago. Leaders who never sign documents rarely choose direct language. Finally, he said what the call was really about. He asked if I would consider coming back, not consulting, not advising, coming back. As an employee. That was when clarity turned into something quieter and steadier. "You removed my salary," I told him calmly. "Not my responsibility." He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. The truth has weight when it's finally allowed into the room, I explained, without accusation. How systems remember who carries risk. How insurance doesn't care about titles or confidence. How responsibility isn't something you delete with access changes. Mark sighed. He tried again. Softer this time. He talked about loyalty, about fixing things, about restoring trust. I offered my own perspective, one shaped by years of holding the line quietly. Trust isn't restored by reversing decisions. It's restored by understanding why they failed in the first place. Going back as an employee would erase the lesson everyone needed to learn, including him. So I declined. Not angrily, not dramatically. I told him I wouldn't return as staff. I wished him well. I meant it. When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt settled. There's a difference. Satisfaction doesn't always come from winning. Sometimes it comes from refusing to pretend the past didn't happen. I knew what would follow. The board would look for external authority, insurance would demand structure, and Mark would finally understand that responsibility doesn't disappear when you dismiss the person carrying it. I set my phone down and went back to my evening. Quiet satisfaction isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply confirms that you stood where you needed to stand and didn't step back when pressure tried to pull you somewhere smaller again. I understood then that this moment wasn't about ego or revenge. It was about boundaries finally respected. I had carried weight for years without recognition. Now the weight remained. But it was visible, that visibility, more than any apology, was enough for me. It allowed me to move forward without bitterness, regret, or the need. The announcement came quietly, which felt appropriate. There was no company-wide email, no farewell message framed as gratitude. Mark Reynolds resigned in a closed session with the board. His title removed before most employees finished their morning coffee. By noon, his name no longer appeared on internal approvals. Authority, once loud, vanished without ceremony. Tyler Brooks was gone by the end of the day. No announcement, no explanation. His desk was cleared by security after hours. His access revoked with the same efficiency that had replaced me. I didn't feel sympathy or satisfaction. Tyler was never the problem. He had been a shortcut. And shortcuts always disappear when consequences arrive. Karen Whitman remained longer, but not comfortably. HR doesn't escape scrutiny when structure collapses. Investigators requested emails, process logs, approval trails. Questions multiplied. Policies were reread slowly, this time with intent instead of assumption. Karen's confidence thinned as each decision she had handled revealed a missing authorization. Cold justice isn't emotional, it's administrative. From a distance, I watched the company recalibrate. Meetings shrank, voices softened, decisions slowed. Insurance doesn't rush for anyone, and neither does a board that has just learned how close it came to disaster. They weren't angry anymore. They were careful. That shift mattered more than any apology. Then the call came, not from Mark, but from James Holloway. He didn't waste time. He explained the board's position clearly. Coverage needed stability. Regulators needed assurance. The company needed someone external, credible, and legally recognized to oversee risk and responsibility until a permanent structure was rebuilt. He offered me a contract, independent consultant, triple my previous rate, defined scope, defined authority, no employment title, no internal politics. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I took a moment before answering, not for leverage, but for clarity. Returning as an employee would have rewritten the lesson. Consulting preserved it. I'll review the terms, I said. When the call ended, I felt the weight shift again, but this time it settled evenly. Cold justice isn't revenge. It doesn't humiliate. It corrects. Mark lost his position because the system demanded accountability. Tyler lost his role because speed couldn't replace authority. HR faced investigation because process without responsibility is fiction. And I was asked back, not because I fought, but because I had been right all along. That mattered, not to my ego, but to the principle that experience, when ignored, doesn't disappear. It waits. And when consequences arrive, it becomes the only thing left standing. The company would survive, chastened and slower, but intact. That outcome wasn't dramatic, it was fair, and fairness, in systems like these, is the coldest form of justice there is. I understood then that the ending wasn't loud or heroic, just precise. Consequences didn't negotiate, didn't argue, and didn't care who approved budgets before. They followed records, signatures, and facts, and they stopped exactly where responsibility truly lived. No anger required, only alignment and time. The contract arrived 2 days later, clean and unembellished, the way serious agreements always are. I read it slowly. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to feel the absence of urgency. Independent consultant, defined authority, defined liability, triple the fee, no internal reporting lines, no ambiguity. I signed without ceremony. There was no celebration afterward, no surge of triumph. What I felt instead was resolution. The quiet kind that settles when something long misaligned finally locks into place. I wasn't returning to reclaim a desk or a title. I was stepping back in as structure. As a boundary the company now understood it needed. Work resumed quickly. Meetings became shorter. Questions became sharper. Every decision paused at the same point, waiting for confirmation that responsibility had been acknowledged, documented, and accepted. I noticed how carefully people spoke around that word now. Responsibility. It had weight again. From the outside, little seemed different. From the inside, everything had changed. Authority moved more slowly. Confidence checked itself. Systems behaved exactly as designed, demanding proof instead of promises. I thought about Mark Reynolds once, briefly, about how certain he'd been that control lived in access, that leadership could be handed off like a password reset. It wasn't cruelty that corrected him, it was consequence. The dignity I regained didn't come from being proven right, it came from being trusted again, on terms that recognized what I actually carried all those years. Not access, not speed, responsibility. When the final signature dried, I closed my laptop and allowed myself a small smile. Not satisfaction, recognition. The story didn't end with applause, only with alignment, accountability restored, and a company forced to grow up quietly, without shortcuts, excuses, or someone else absorbing the cost again. Passwords open systems, signatures carry consequences. I learned something simple from this story: real value isn't loud, and responsibility never disappears just because someone ignores it. Control can be taken away in a meeting, but integrity stays where it was earned. As you listened, how did this story make you feel? Anger, relief, or something quieter? And which moment stayed with you the most? Where are you listening from right now? If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like and share it with someone who might need it, and consider subscribing so we can keep telling stories like this together. Stories like this together. Stories like this together.